Hi, I'm Jenny Taylor Martin, a director here at Edgar Cayce's A.R.E. Today I'm speaking with Lynn Sparrow Christy, who's the author of Beyond Soul Growth, Awakening to the Call of Cosmic Evolution. Lynn, it's such a pleasure to have you with us today.
Well, it's very good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit about your book and what is meant by Beyond Soul Growth?
Essentially, this book is about our place in an ongoing evolutionary process that stretches at least as far back as the Big Bang. Often when we talk about soul growth or when we use the term personal spirituality, we're talking about something that is primarily motivated by a desire for us to feel better or to have more peace or happiness. There's another take on the spiritual path that says those things are great and yes, they will come, but there's a deeper purpose, and it has to do with our ability to take our place in that ongoing process of evolution where we're actually the carriers of the next level of awakening.
What is evolutionary spirituality and what distinguishes it from other spiritual paths?
I think the distinction is largely one of context because, of course, any spiritual path that calls us to grow, to develop, to become more and better than we have previously been is evolutionary by its very nature. Evolutionary spirituality is a very specific path, takes the question of how are we going to contextualize our place here in these often unruly flesh bodies, in this frustratingly messy three-dimensional world. Most of the spiritual traditions will tend to see this world, this life, as a way station at best. In traditional Western spirituality, often this life is nothing more than a tryout for heaven. Will we make the grade? Will we have the right beliefs to get there when we die? And actually, the New Age version doesn't put a whole lot more importance on this world because so often this life is cast as a mistake that we got involved with long ago, or an illusion that we need to wake up to, something that we need to outgrow at the earliest possible time. In evolutionary spirituality, there is the question of what if the one behind all of this, that all-encompassing principle that, for lack of a better term, we call God, what if God had an intent and a purpose in bringing this world into existence? Can we really look at the vastness of the cosmos, staggering perspectives on the size and the scope of space and the story of evolution, and say that all of this is just a figment of somebody's imagination? Is there instead a reason that we're here? And evolutionary spirituality would say a resounding yes, that our purpose in soul growth, in doing those spiritual disciplines that of course are important, is to equip us to be conscious participants in the evolutionary breakthrough that the human race has the potential to be a part of right now.
I love the idea that our being here is not a mistake, but actually has a purpose.
Yes, because, I was always deeply troubled by the idea, and we hear it many times, that our purpose in being here is about getting back to the perfect state we had before it all began. And suddenly, eons of human experience, all of the achievements, all of the sorrows, all of the triumphs, everything about human experience becomes about nothing more than getting back to where we all started. That to me is a very futile view of why we're here. If you're driving along on the unlimited access highway and you discover you've missed your exit and you have to double back to get to where you first went wrong, that's a totally frustrating experience that most of us can relate to. Is it possible that all of human life is just going back to where we missed our turn? So I like the idea that there is an ongoing forward movement. Yes, we have made mistakes, there's no doubt about that, but that the general direction is one of moving forward, and the main arena for that forward movement is here in flesh, in materiality.
Is what you're describing like the intelligent design approach to evolution?
Actually, it's very, very different. It might sound similar at first brush when we talk about the creator behind all of this having an intent and a purpose. But with intelligent design, there is usually the idea of a God who is somewhat outside of creation, a God who has a master plan, a blueprint, and all of it is playing out according to that external creator's ideas. If we have any co-creative role at all in intelligent design, it's just to figure out what God wants to do and then do it. With evolutionary spirituality, it's more predicated on the idea of how much of God is within us. God, of course, within us and beyond all of us, and all of us collectively at the same time. And so with evolutionary spirituality, the idea is that we are not just the construction workers carrying out God's blueprint. We are fellow architects who also have the responsibility of carrying out the work of being here. But the choices we make, the priorities that we establish, the directions that we tend to move in collectively are literally influencing the direction that evolution takes. That's why it's so important that we wake up.
We always think of evolution as survival of the fittest, but that doesn't sound very spiritual. How do we apply evolutionary thought to our spiritual progress?
It doesn't sound very spiritual, does it? And in fact, although we hear most often about survival of the fittest, there is more and more awareness that cooperation has been equally important to evolution every step of the way. They work together. So survival of the fittest would indeed suggest that the one best equipped to stay alive, first and foremost, to get enough food, to be able to make it through the trials and the threats of life, is the one most likely to reproduce and therefore survive. But if we look at the pathway of evolution, what we'll find is that those who have survived are only able to reach their next level of development by joining together in cooperatives. When the first single-celled organisms came together to form multicellular organisms, where there was specialization of these cells will do one part of living and these other cells will carry on a different point, that's cooperation. Those earliest survivors in our human history were able to do better at surviving when they banded together in family and tribal groups. And so what we find is a back and forth where, yes, the individual development, that would be the fittest surviving, is important, but always to get to the next step, there needs to be cooperation. So what that means for us spiritually is that we have to do our individual work. We have to work with applying spiritual law more and more to our dealings with other people. We have to allow our consciousness to grow beyond its limitations through a committed life of meditation and so on. But there comes a point where that personal survival aspect, that is, me feeling better about my own spirituality, is going to be a ceiling. It won't be until I come together with others and our collective growing spiritually enables us to move beyond where we are now as a human race to the next frontier.
And speaking about the human race moving beyond where we are now, in your book you say we're on the verge of our next evolutionary development. What do you mean by that?
Well, if we could go back to the whole purpose for our being here and part of the evolutionary process, what we have to look at is that it seems the direction of evolution is one of consciousness breaking forth into matter. And so we, as far as we know, being the most conscious of the sentient beings here on this planet, are involved with bringing consciousness to a new level here in material form. Consciousness is not something that is an on-off, yes or no thing in earthly life. People familiar with the Cayce readings, for example, will know that he said long ago that there is consciousness in every cell. However, I doubt if the consciousness in the cells of my stomach are saying, I wonder what kind of nutritional building block she's going to throw down to us today when she eats her breakfast. That's a higher level of consciousness than most of us would ever imagine a cell to have. Similarly, anyone who's ever owned a pet or who has watched some of the nature programs about animal intelligence would know that animals have a lot more consciousness than we human beings previously, in our arrogance, were willing to see. However, no matter how conscious we might imagine our pet to be, I don't think many of us would imagine that our dog or our cat is pondering, what was here before I was born? Or what will happen after I die? Or what is the meaning of all of this? Those kinds of questions seem to be unique to the human being, and those are the questions that suggest consciousness having developed to the point where it can reflect on itself. It's called self-reflective awareness. And that extends to a lot of applications. We can reflect on our own thoughts. Was that a thought worthy of my ideals? Was that a thought that's going to help me grow? Is what I did yesterday in line with the highest principles that I'm trying to live according to? All of that ability for us to reflect on ourselves, on our values, on whether we do or do not live up to them, our ability to contemplate some of the more abstract questions about life, is a very highly developed level of consciousness. And for most of us right now in the human race, just developing that is a frontier. But there is something beyond that the sages have been pointing to, because of course there are always those who are ahead of the curve. And it's not that the next level of consciousness hasn't shown up yet. It's that so few have attained it that the mass of us are in the process of catching up now. But the next level is what has been called unity consciousness. Or, as Edgar Cayce would have called it, to know ourselves to be ourselves and yet one with God. And by that I understand him to mean the overarching reality in which we live and move and have our being, one with one another, one with our source. That's a paradoxical state where we are simultaneously aware of ourselves as a self-reflective consciousness that knows ourself to be an I am, and yet being totally one with other people, with our source. As Edgar Cayce put it in one reading, to know ourselves as the I am within the great I am. So this unity consciousness of oneness is the next frontier. But in order to truly participate in that, we are also called to develop as fully as possible our capacity for self-reflective awareness.
So evolutionary spirituality is addressed in the Edgar Cayce readings.
Yes, Edgar Cayce actually has a lot to say about the evolutionary path, and it's kind of been hiding in plain sight. And as a result, we haven't heard Edgar Cayce mentioned much in evolutionary spirituality circles. But if you look at it, one of the things that will stand out as you read the readings is that from the get-go, these readings referred to God not only as God, but as creative force. That's an evolutionary perspective. In talking about our ultimate purpose, these readings again and again and again say that being a co-creator with that creative force is our deepest purpose and meaning. That's an evolutionary statement. Co-creatorship is another way of describing that we're helping to make the next level. People were often frustrated when Edgar Cayce couldn't be pinned down real specifically on prophetic issues because he always said, it depends on what you do about it. That's an evolutionary statement. In talking about the human being and the soul as in the process of becoming something more than we currently are, there's a fascinating reading that says the destiny of the soul, of course, is to go back to God, but the question is, will we go back empty as at the creation, or bearing the name. Now that's a whole other big topic, but in essence we could say bearing the name has to do with a developed identity that was not yet there when we were first brought into being. So the longer you look, the deeper you look, you'll find that Edgar Cayce's cosmology and his view of spirituality was deeply rooted in an evolutionary perspective.
Lynn, it's been such a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. It's been my pleasure.
Beyond Soul Growth, Awakening to the Call of Cosmic Evolution is published by A.R.E. Press and available at arecatalog.com.